Hey everyone, in this video, I want to show you how you can configure Cortex to use one database for your shareable data and a completely separate database for the Cortex-specific data. This is useful if you want to be able to save ad hoc searches or customize or override the security groups that various users are mapped to when they log in, or change the configuration of external data connections. Now, you could do all three of those just by enabling write access of one form or another to the same database that you're using for your shareable data. And you could either just allow write access to the entire database, or you can enable it only on the schema level, basically a specific part of the database that Cortex has write access to, even while it only has read access to most of the database. If you want to go that route, you can check out the video linked in the description where I talk about adding uh, write capabilities to a read-only user. Um, but if you want to completely separate it out into two totally separate databases, this is the video for you. Um, it's not as technical as the previous video or even the video that came before that, where I showed you how to create a brand new SQL user. All of this has to do with the app settings JSON file that, if you've configured any part of Cortex so far, you've probably already seen it. It's the file that appears in all of our documentation, and it's the one file that's used to configure the entire application. So let's take a look at that. So here we have a pretty empty appsettings.json. Uh, we see the usual pieces: the connection string, licensing, where you enter your license key, and all of the spots where you can configure authentication. Uh, Realistically, the only thing that you need to configure in order to set up Cortex is this default connection string, because you could just type authentication none. And while I wouldn't recommend that on a public facing server, and certainly not for production, that bypasses the need to configure any part of the authentication and automatically logs you in as CSD admin. So realistically, the only thing you need to configure is this default connection string here. So you would have something like server equals MySQL server, not to be confused with MySQL. This is MS SQL, I guess. Let's just call it SQL server. And then UID equals, let's say, Cortex, password equals, something super secure like that. Uh, Database equals, call it Sharewell, and so on and so forth. Right. Let's assume that that is your connection string. Okay, that's great. And that will certainly enable you to access all of your shareable data in Cortex. But let's say that this is read-only. Let's call this Cortex read-only, just to drill the point home. Well, at this point, with this read-only user, you won't be able to save your ad hoc searches. You won't be able to override or update those user security group mappings, and you won't be able to update how external data connections are accessed and configured. So, of course, one option is that you could just specify, instead of the read-only version, you could use your read-write, basically all access uh, credentials. That's one option. Uh, but we want to keep that shareable data read-only. So we've added the ability to specify a separate connection string for the Cortex information. So create a second connection string, keep the default connection string in there, but create another one called Cortex, and it can be whatever you want. It can be a totally different connection string. It can be on a completely different server, but at the very least, it can be a separate, um, user and probably database as well is what you'd want. So let's change the database to Cortex. We can say, obviously, this needs to be read write. So Cortex read write. We'll pretend the password is the same. And now we have all of the Cortex tables written to the Cortex database, and all of the Cherwell tables are being read from the old Cherwell database. Now, one note on this is that all of the Cortex tables still are part of the Cortex schema. So don't go looking for them in the DBO schema. They will show up in the Cortex schema. But because they're in their totally own separate database, that shouldn't be an issue for you at all. And that's basically it. Second connection string, as long as it's named Cortex with a capital C, it will get picked up and it will be used for all of those Cortex tables. Now, if this is interesting to you and you want to see some of the previous videos where I talk about creating some of these users and how to make them read write to certain parts of the database, again, links down in the video description. Um, there's also a video that I'll link over there probably on how you can save uh, some logs from Cortex to the database. This allows you to be able to see them through the web UI and even submit them to us for troubleshooting. If that's something you're interested in checking out, check out that video there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.